All right. Well, welcome to this month's meeting of the BSA Marketing and PR Network. I'm going to start by introducing our two fantastic leaders of this presentation. So first, Tammy Dayton, who is the design director and founder of Moth Design. Moth is a strategic design studio, and they specialize in brand editorial and web design. Moth's work has been recognized with numerous industry awards, and their clients laud Tammy and her team for their clear processes, their ability to listen and go deep, and the geeky goodness of their gorgeous designs. And Dave Demerjian is principal and founder of 43,000 Feet. Did I do it wrong, Dave?
That was pretty close. That was good.
Dave Demerjian. Do it for me. What is it?
Dave Demerjian.
Dave Demerjian. Oh, okay. We're gonna get it right. I'm gonna try again at the end. Principal and founder of 43,000 Feet. 43K helps clients compete in a complex, content-driven world with services that include brand messaging, copywriting, AI architecture, and content strategy. Dave and his team are brilliant writers, but even better, they are curious, collaborative, they're detail-oriented while being big picture thinkers, and they're dead fun to work with.
Wow.
And yeah, there you go. And I'm Kate Murphy. I'm the director of marketing at Goody, Clancy, an architecture firm here in Boston. And together with Marcia Miller, I co-chair the BSA Marketing and PR Network. My firm, Goody Clancy, recently completed a rebrand with Tammy and Dave about 6 months ago. But the plan to have them present dates back well before our collaboration started. Their work with Boston AEC firms also includes rebranding, work with Shepley Bulfinch and ARC. So Tammy and Dave are going to run the show this morning. They will thread examples from our Goody Clancy collaboration throughout. So I'll add a client's perspective as we go. And Marcia will graciously and expertly monitor the chat. Feel free to add any questions you have in the chat, or you can save them for Q&A at the end. We'll also conduct a few polls as we go, and those will provide another opportunity throughout for discussion. So without further ado, Tammy, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Kate. That was such a nice introduction. I feel like Dave and I should have returned the favor to you. So thank you so much for the great introduction. As Kate mentioned, we have a lot of content to get through, and we want to be sure that we leave plenty of time for questions and discussion at various points. But first things first, we're going to dive in. Brand can mean lots of different things to different people. And so we thought it would help to just start with some foundational definitions of how we think about brand. Brand is really the combination of your story and your visuals. Those two things come together to really help communicate the way that you want your organization to be perceived and to inform ultimately the brand experience that your audience is having, and long term to really build a foundational brand reputation and image. Building an effective brand takes time. This is not a flip of the switch kind of situation. It really requires a lot of consistency, thoughtfulness, and repetition. When we build a brand, there are two components that we really think about. Within the brand messaging, Dave and I are going to talk a little bit more deeply about some of these elements as we go further. But brand pillars, these are essentially sort of what makes you different in the marketplace and how you communicate that to your team, voice and tone, how you sound and feel to your audience, boilerplate, the who, what, why of who you are, audience messaging. When you're building a brand, you might talk to prospective clients a little differently than you might talk to prospective staff or to press and media. And then the brand anthem is a 43K special that's really sort of like a proof of concept and essentially like the movie trailer for your organization. Within the visual side of things, there is your logo. And oftentimes we find that people might use logo as shorthand for brand. Your brand is so much more than your logo. Your logo is really important, but it's very rare that your logo exists in a vacuum. Your logo is typically paired with a robust color and typographic palette. In today's digital age, oftentimes it's your art direction for your imagery and your videography that are the things that people remember and that really evoke and imbue that sense of personality. So very important to be thinking about that. And also opportunities, of course, for graphic elements to support your brand. So with that, we're going to put you to work bright and early this
Yeah.
week and dive right in.
Yeah. So, sometimes organizations will come to us and say, well, we think maybe we need rebranding. We're not totally sure. And we ask people to start by really kind of thinking about how healthy is our brand now, and do we need to embark on rebranding work? There's a series of questions that we suggest people ask, and we're going to have this group fill out a quick poll just to answer some of the questions that we suggest clients ask when they're considering rebranding. 5 questions are, do target customers, are they aware of our firm? Do they know who we are? Do they have a clear understanding of what we do? Does the brand we have now really kind of reflect the organization and what we offer? Are we considered a top choice in the space? And is the brand that we have now being executed consistently across all of our communications? So we thought it would be fun if we asked everyone on this call to answer those questions. So as a Gen X tech savvy creative, I am now going to execute a poll so that all of you can answer those very questions. And we'll give this about 10 minutes, and you should all see the poll now. So take a few minutes if you would, and answer these questions. It'd be great. Did the poll come up?
It did. Yep.
Yes.
This is so exciting. We need music.
I
Dum
know.
dum 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 dum. Okay, not my music.
I didn't know you were a singer, Kate.
That was your takeaway? Hmm.
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 Mhm.
I'm realizing now how hard it is for like NPR political commentary to sort of, work with 1% of polls returned.
Right.
What we're seeing now from the 7 people who voted.
We've got a 75% participation rate. Oh, 77. Look at that.
Awesome.
I think we can probably close it,
All
Dave.
right. Ending poll number 1. Boom. And I shall now share the results of poll number 1. All right. Can everyone see the results of the poll? Okay, great. I mean, Tammy, what do you want to do here?
I'm curious, as folks are sort of looking and seeing, how does this strike you? It looks like actually lots of people are feeling like customers are relatively aware of the firm, but that there might be issues around consistency. And just wondering, do folks have any questions, any sort of observations they want to share here?
I'll jump in while everybody else's coffee is kicking in because I've been going for a while. I'm noticing that there's like a very similar curve on all of these responses, like awareness, clarity, accuracy of brand. There's a lot of similarity in how people are answering. And I wonder whether people are getting that sense of their sort of clients, experience of them from client polls, or whether it's a sort of general feeling
Hmm.
based on, I don't know, repeat clients or something like that.
Yep, that's a good question, Kate. Curious when people are noting that maybe there's some challenges with brand consistency. Maybe you could put in the chat. Does anyone have a sense of where those challenges are stemming from?
Or if there are particular channels where it's difficult to maintain that consistency?
I will add Susan Elmore in the chat already threw in, we may not be the best judges of our own firm's brand, which is a fair
Yeah.
point, Susan.
Yep. Sometimes we've worked with firms and there's a sense of wild, wild west where folks are out there sort of producing materials and, that there might not be kind of a shared sense of what's best for the brand. Does anyone have that experience at their firm?
I can say that we used to have that experience. One other thing I'm noticing in the responses is that, I mean, although there is a skew towards like the four, it's kind of split 50-50 between whether people feel neutral or not certain, and whether people are feeling a little bit more confident. So
Yeah.
there is some ambivalence here.
That's a good point. All right, well, maybe we just keep moving.
Keep moving.
All right.
Oh, and there are a lot of comments coming in the chat.
Yeah.
Julia, and you guys can feel free to unmute at any point and just shout it out when we're doing these. But Julia Hoggins was saying we have different divisions with different services, and so consistency can be tough across those different services and products. And Jennifer Wells shared that sometimes it's challenging to know what project teams are sharing with clients from a graphic standpoint on presentations. And I think we all feel that.
Absolutely.
We've also worked with firms that have different offices geographically, and that kind of creates another set of challenges because you potentially have different people working in different offices.
Right.
Okay, so let's keep going. So we're going to talk a little bit about brand versus marketing. And, one of the things that we hear sometimes as organizations are trying to sell through the idea of needing to do branding is that certain people within their organizations might not even understand. They'll say, well, we have a brand, we have branding, but what they're actually talking about is their strategic plan or kind of their strategic vision. So we really look at it as organizational strategy being kind of in the center, and that is what drives the business. We look at brand as kind of the way you're articulating, that vision, how it looks, how it feels. And then marketing is really how you're disseminating that out into the marketplace. All of those need to work together, but obviously they're different. Sometimes the way people will explain it in very kind of plain speak for people that are having trouble understanding within their organization is that you think of brand as the house where you live. Marketing is the invitation to the big party that you're throwing there. And then the brand experience is that great time that you had at the party and what you think of me as a result of attending that party. So, again, we find when organizations are doing rebranding, sometimes there needs to be some education within the organization about exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about brand.
Mm-hmm. I would add in on the previous slide, like that bit in the center, the organizational strategy, that really was an important aspect of how Goody Clancy's rebrand work came about. We knew for years that we needed a new website. We had let it go. It felt increasingly misaligned with the kind of work we were doing. But we also knew that we wanted to complete our strategic planning work first. And having the strategic plan in place, that was what really gave us a clear mission and a vision, which was the aspiration that then powered the brand work. I don't know if we could have been as thoughtful as we were had we not done that work first.
Yeah. So again, brand is more than a logo. It's the organization's full visual identity, but also that messaging framework that Tammy touched on earlier. Successful brand reflects and effectively communicates an organization's offerings and value, but it's very different than business strategy, although the two do need to play well together.
Mm-hmm.
Marketing is how brand is disseminated into the marketplace. And brand experience is what people think and how they feel after they engage with the brand, after they've been to that great house party.
Great. So we spent a lot of time thinking about what's the best way to talk about the way we approach website, brand, messaging, visual identity, sort of all these components that are interconnected. And picture's worth 1,000 words. So what we want to do is sort of give you a little bit of a peek behind the curtain of Goody Clancy. We're going to talk through the brand that we built for them, but also just sort of show you some of the process that led to that and the benefit of, having both sides of the team here, Kate from the client side and Dave and I from the firm side, is hopefully if you're thinking about doing any branding work, whether that's internal or external, that this gives you a sense of sort of how to help shepherd that process through. It's the three of us who are talking with you today, but we had the benefit of a multi-talented team that helped to support this work. Now, it's absolutely the case that some brands are built by a team of one, and some brands are built by a team of 30. And so hopefully the process that we're going to lay out for you feels like something that could scale, no matter the size of your group and no matter sort of the level of effort that you think you might need. On a high level, the things we're going to talk through is discovery. So this is really the phase where we sort of research the opportunities for the brand, and that includes, you know, who you are, how you talk about yourselves, how you're perceived in the marketplace, what the marketplace itself looks like. We're constantly sort of going through, you know, change, and technology is really sort of changing not just branding, but also your specific sectors. And so thinking about sort of how it makes sense to sort of pivot your organization if needed, but also thinking about sort of how you are perceived. Messaging is really sort of what your brand says and how it says that. And then that really underpins the visual identity. You can see here the before and after of Goody Clancy, and we're going to talk a little later about brand evolution versus revolution. This is a pretty radical visual shift in the logo and in the homepage design as well. But as Dave and Kate talked about earlier, a lot of this had to do with when we came in, we heard loud and clear from Goody Clancy that they had spent a good deal of time thinking about their strategic plan, thinking about their strategic positioning. And when we talked with their clients, with their internal team members, to us, that signaled sort of putting a stake in the ground and really sort of reintroducing the new Goody Clancy, the evolved Goody Clancy sort of to the world. That's not always the case, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
All right, so let's start by talking about discovery. You know, at its core, discovery is intended to help you understand the who, what, and why of your organization via deep listening and market research. That involves both internal discovery, where we're talking to the client team, and then external discovery, where we're speaking with customers, clients. So we like to do internal discovery in person whenever we can, especially post-COVID. It just feels really good to be in a room and do some of these workshops together. We always bring an enormous amount of candy with us.
So much candy.
So much candy. But we like to start with a full day of kind of, you know, workshops where we're really giving people the opportunity to just share their thoughts. We do one of the kind of marquee exercises we do is this fill in the blank exercise where we ask people all kinds of different questions. We ask them to put sticky notes up on the wall, and then we just, we find themes, we find outliers, and it's just a chance for the client team to really hear what each other is saying and to identify patterns. So some of the questions that we'll ask, you know, we want people to talk about how we help our clients. What are some of the ways that we help our clients? You know, things that we wish people knew about our organization, misperceptions about the organization. It drives me crazy that people think we do X, Y, and Z. You know, what is our firm's personality? What are those kind of words or phrases that speak to who we are? You know, and if people knew just one thing about us, what should it be? In addition to doing those internal workshops, we also always make a point of speaking to customers and clients. We keep the interviews anonymous because we want clients to be kind of as candid and comfortable as possible. We never have the client on the phone when we're talking to customers. You know, conversations typically cover a wide range of different topics. So what we do is we anonymize all the transcripts and then compile them by theme, so that we start to identify kind of a series of themes that are going to inform the branding work. More often than not, what we're hearing externally will align with what we're hearing internally, which is kind of how we know that we're on the right track with discovery in terms of what we're learning and coming back with.
One thing I just say here too, and this goes back to one of the comments in the chat, is that sometimes when we work with organizations, they might have a perception of how their brand's performing. There is a benefit of getting an external party to talk with your end audience. So even if you're evolving your brand internally, if there's a way you can think about a neutral party who can talk to some of your clients, your prospective clients, prospective staff, there's sometimes some magic here that happens where people might love your firm, but they really wish you could do this a little differently. And so just getting that honest feedback can often really help direct, changes, evolution to the brand, and can really just provide super valuable insights, even if internally you feel like your brand is performing pretty well.
Yeah. We also do, Tammy, I don't know if you want to speak to this, but we also do kind of a visual exercise as part of discovery.
Yeah, I think actually we probably started doing this right around the time of working with Shepley Bullfinch when Jen Wells was the VP of brand strategy there. One of the things that we found in particular working with architecture firms is that it's important to establish a shared visual language early in the process. And so when we say modern, that might conjure up an image in our mind that's a little different from what modern means to someone else in the room. And so very early in the process, and again, I think this could be helpful for an internal team. We know that some architecture firms do this for your own work, is just putting things on a board or on a screen and talking about what the group thinks is working well, what isn't working well. And part of this is establishing likes and dislikes, but for us, the secret of this is actually establishing a shared visual language. So when someone says, I love how polished and professional this looks, that might not have been the language that our team would have used to describe something, but then we understand what something that's polished and professional looks like to the team. And this really helps, I would say, leapfrog the process and move things along more clearly by putting visual people in a room together, talking about visual things without anyone having any ego attached to them, and then essentially sort of helping to direct the direction of the visual work moving forward.
So once we've completed discovery, we share a report of findings, and it kind of helps ensure that our team is on the same page as the client. It gives us an opportunity to kind of talk through what we heard, any surprises, make sure there's alignment, and at that point we move into brand messaging. So what is brand messaging and why does it matter? Messaging toolkit can take many, many different forms based on the needs of the organization, but typically there's a minimum of 7 key components. And those are really used to inform a whole range of different communications, from kind of foundational pieces all the way to kind of language that you can literally plug and play into different types of communications. We really recommend that organizations who are doing branding work start with messaging. Not only does it ensure clarity and consistency, but it also will inform, visual strategy, web strategy. So messaging work really should be the first part of any brand engagement. So I'm going to walk you through some of the pieces of a typical messaging platform. If you start with kind of these foundational ideas, brand pillars, your core truths, brand voice, which is your tone and personality, and then those slowly become kind of more practical execution. So audience messaging, how are we speaking to different groups, an about us narrative, big idea, manifesto, sample language. We're going to show you examples of some of the language that we developed for Goody Clancy. So brand pillars, these are really the foundational truths about your organization. We also call them reasons to believe. They are supposed to articulate your core strengths and differentiators. And when you're talking about your organization, you really want to make sure that you're stressing these elements. These are kind of the core truths of the organization. So when we talk or write about Goody Clancy, there's 4 brand pillars that we want to keep in mind. One is that, Goody Clancy creates environments that are designed for discovery, innovation, and community. We believe in the power of education. We have a unique understanding of every client. Go ahead, Tammy.
Oh, I did. Did it not advance?
Yeah. Whoops. One more.
Okay,
Yep.
sorry. There we go.
That's okay. A pillar here about the people. We're passionate people who are committed to learning and growth. We care about each other. We care about our work and our clients. And then finally, we're in the education market. We're doing good work today and we're working for a better tomorrow. So those are the brand pillars. Those are the kind of the key points that we want to talk about when we're writing about or articulating the Goody Clancy story. Brand voice, this is how an organization conveys its personality. It's supposed to kind of reflect the energy and the attitude and the tone that you want to convey through all aspects of your brand. So there's 4 brand voice attributes that we developed for Goody Clancy. These are not external marketing language, but they're more kind of guidelines on how to write and talk about the organization. So we're idealistic yet modest. We hold ourselves and our clients to high standards, but without arrogance, superiority, or blue sky thinking. I think sometimes brand voice guidelines can feel a little abstract. So what we typically do is we kind of do before and after examples here. So on the left here, there's a passage of writing that, while it may be accurate, it maybe feels a little bit arrogant. And so we've got kind of an after example here. And we do that for each of the brand voice guidelines. So we're expert, but plain spoken, we're sophisticated, we do complex work, but we're also, very patient and form authentic connection with our clients and colleagues. We're proven yet flexible. We have this established process and a lot of experience, but we never kind of get ahead of our client's vision. Long-standing yet future-facing. We celebrate our legacy, but we're also always looking to the future. So then it starts to get a little bit more fun and it starts to get a little bit more creative, where we come up with what we like to call the big idea. This is the conceptual theme. It kind of functions as a creative anchor. It's not really a tagline, but it's a starting point for exploring ways to articulate brand pillars, other elements of the brand. And again, it's not kind of a fixed tagline. It's supposed to be flexible and directional, which means that it's really just a starting point for all kinds of communications. So the big idea that we came up with for Goody Clancy was design that drives discovery. We like the idea that discovery is an effective proxy for education, which is obviously the market where Goody Clancy is focused. Drives is this confident, active verb that evokes a balance between listening and leading, which is an important part of the Goody Clancy story. We like this relationship between design and discovery. Goody Clancy's work, which is the design, empowers clients to do their work, which is the discovery. And then we just like the DDD construction. We feel like it kind of rolls off the tongue.
What's your name again, Dave?
Dave,
I'm just noticing this.
That's actually how we got there, yeah. The other thing we liked about design that drives discovery is that as we looked at Goody Clancy's business and the different things they're doing within education, we found that this worked on a bunch of different levels, different types of spaces, different types of clients, different types of scenarios. Then we also get into developing a boilerplate, which is kind of the, hardworking summary of the organization. You can go ahead, Tammy. I mean, these are a lot harder to write than they seem. And what we do is we pressure test them in a couple different ways. One thing we do is whenever we write a boilerplate, we want to make sure we're answering the who, the what, the how, and the why. Another thing we do is we literally break this down line by line, because I think when you've got something that needs to be as concise as a boilerplate, you want to make sure every single word matters and every single word is in there for a reason. So you can see here, we've broken down Goody Clancy's boilerplate. You can see where we're calling out each of those brand themes, where we're talking about some of the brand tone and personality, and then answering the basics about the organization. And then finally, clients need kind of different versions of boilerplate for different use cases. So we always, create a main version, and then we try to boil it down all the way down to versions that are no more than 20 words.
Do you want to chime in here at all in terms of?
I do.
Yes.
Because the thing that came up for me before we even started the process was, why do I need a writer? I have been told by several people that I am a good writer myself. That's why I'm doing this work. What I realized very quickly is that working with a consultant on messaging is, I've got an analogy. I was thinking about this last night. It's kind of like when I pick my furniture and paint versus hiring an interior designer. The value of a consultant is immeasurable. So I've got 24 wallpaper samples under my desk, and I've got an active Pinterest habit, and I know how to DIY. I have this bookshelf, but an interior designer is going to back up with me. They're going to sit down and ask me about my lifestyle, my family's needs, my day-to-day goals, how I want my home to feel, how I want it to make my guests feel. The result of that work is going to carry bigger picture perspective, strategy. It's going to be more thoughtful, and it's going to live outside of my immediate experience. Is that a fair comparison, Dave?
I mean, Kate, do you feel like it's just the fact that we were coming in new to the organization, kind of without preconceived notions and without kind of marinating in it every day? Is that?
I think that's exactly it. It would be a lot harder for me to step out of my sort of narrow experience of my day-to-day without somebody asking me those deeper questions and being able to see the bigger picture. And I think that's what hiring a consultant to do this writing and brand strategy work with us really allowed us to do.
Yeah, and I think that also kind of ties back to the importance of kind of doing the discovery, like by having those conversations both internally and with your customers. I think that gave us kind of a better roadmap, and we potentially pursued messaging directions that we might not have without doing that work up front. So yes.
Yeah.
Great. So the messaging work is what underpins the visual identity work as well. And so there's lots of different ways to approach brand. The way that we do it is we really use the messaging as a springboard for design concepts, just in the same way that we talked about those visual workshops where we're saying, what does modern mean to you versus what does it mean to us? We find that when an organization aligns on those core values, we are then not debating sort of nuances of the logo in the same way, because what we found is sometimes if you do a visual identity without messaging as the underpinning, people are debating ideas in the logo. Whereas when we start with messaging, we can really agree on those foundational ideas. That then gives us sort of a strong foundation to sketch upon. We still want to debate the details of the logo, and we still want to debate sort of, those visual considerations. But again, to us, it feels like it sort of gets us further along so that it's not so much that it makes our work easier, but we believe that it really elevates the visual design work. Internally, we use the messaging pillars, voice and tone, and core components of the messaging platform to craft mood boards and identify promising directions. This can sometimes also be a way to validate if your brand is effective or not. So if you went through an internal messaging process, identify voice and tone, identify your messaging pillars, you can then look at your brand and say, okay, we've decided that we're idealistic. Does our brand feel idealistic? We've decided that we're plain spoken. Does our brand feel plain spoken? And so there's sort of a nice conversation there. We'll sketch on visual identity elements. When we sketch on visual identity elements, we are always testing them in cross-channel applications. So what do we mean by that? We don't come to a group and sort of show a logo and a color palette and say, please pick this, and then we'll apply it to your website. Again, a logo really never exists in a vacuum. So what we think is important is for an organization to really make an informed decision about a change to their website or a change to their brand. They need to understand how that change is going to impact everything in their communications ecosystem. So when we're sketching, we're looking at what would that mean for the website? What would that mean for a PowerPoint presentation? What would that mean for social media? We get to a point where it feels finished enough, share it with the client, and then the client is then sort of in that rinse, lather, repeat exercise for us. This is one of my favorite slides of the deck. So this is super behind the scenes. I think Kate hadn't seen this until just last
So
week.
good. Yeah.
So when we're sketching internally, we always, and COVID has actually helped with this. We're using cloud-based tools where we typically have 3 designers who are collaborating and working in a cloud-based tool where they can see each other's work. So this is sort of week 1 of early mood boarding. We're looking at things like, what does it look like if an organization's name is all lowercase, all uppercase, stacked on 2 lines, title case. But as you can see here, there's just some early typesetting studies up at the top. And then down below, those are being tested in very quick, quick 10-minute gestures here of what does color do to that? What does supporting imagery do to that? How does layout impact this? And so really thinking about these visual elements in dialogue with one another. When we get to a place where we feel like we've got sort of directions that we're excited about, we then will share those directions. This is sort of giving you a sense of, this is ultimately the direction that Goody Clancy presented, but this is option A from round 1. This was option B from round 1. And this was option C from round 1. We think it's really important to iterate, to show options. And part of that is because the messaging platform does have room to be interpreted in different ways. And one of the things that we think the visual identity can do is essentially draw more focus to certain components of the messaging platform. One way I like to think about it is almost like turning volume knobs on a stereo, like up and down, like is the bass a little higher, is the, balance a little lower kind of thing. And then also important to that is, Kate, I think you did an amazing job of getting internal buy-in. So I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, we at the marketing team at Goody Clancy hosted 2 or 3 pinups with our whole office and a pile of cookies to share progress and get feedback. And Tammy, I don't know, did you think there might be a danger in our getting
I
an
was
entire...
scared when Kate said she was doing this, but then it turned out it worked beautifully because I think the whole team at Goody Clancy ended up feeling like they were engaged and involved all along.
Yeah, it helped the marketing team act as a sort of Q&A team. So people were able to ask questions about where we were going, and we were able to give them information from the messaging work that Dave had done and other things. And it also, I mean, it also helped us start to build an internal buzz, a kind of steady drumbeat of enthusiasm as we were moving towards launch. And that's really valuable in a different way.
And what
That's
I will say, Kate, maybe part of the reason we were a little nervous is we also do work with a lot of higher ed institutions, and sometimes decision by committee can be dangerous. I
Mhm.
think what was really effective is you got good information, but you and your team were also able to synthesize that and reflect it back to us in a way that was useful and didn't suddenly feel like the core team had expanded to the entire office. So I would just say shout out
I
there.
mean, I guess the only other thing I
That's
would
different
say
call.
here, the only other thing I would say here is, I think a lot of times when we think about brand, we think about what is the impact on prospective clients, what is it going to look like to the outside world. But these exercises are really kind of an excellent way to build kind of morale and excitement internally, and they're kind of an excuse for people to get together and to really kind of celebrate the organization. So I think this is a good example of what Kate did here of just kind of building pride and getting people excited internally.
Right. All right, we're running a little behind, so I'm going to go very quickly through the rest of this. But just to give you a sense, this is where we landed. Again, the logo is important, but not the end all be all. Goody Clancy had a good sense of sort of who their target market was and who they wanted to appeal to. We thought this slab serif logo type was very distinctive in the architecture space, would appeal to their education target demographic. We also loved the quality of these serifs and how it feels like the letter forms are really in dialogue with one another. We created these bespoke ligatures, which is a fancy type term for when two letter forms are touching one another, so that there's a real sense of kind of craft and care in this logo type. And then when Dave talked about design that drives discovery, we really wanted there to be a sense of movement in this logo. And so stacking the two components of the name on different lines, but also sort of having them be staggered to us really feels like that sense of driving discovery, curiosity is really imbued sort of in the mark itself. As we showed early days, we're testing this in the context of web gestures. Certainly very important for any architecture site to think about what a project page looks like. And so these are one of the first things that we test, but it's important to remember that your project pages aren't just photography. You might have diagrams, you might have sketches, you might have background colors. And so we really worked very closely with Goody Clancy to try to think about the specific elements they felt like they would need for their project page to tell a unique story for each one of their projects. The other thing I would say is that when we talk to clients of architecture firms, often it's not necessarily the portfolio piece of the site that is the only thing that people are looking for. They're understanding that this is a long-term relationship that they're making, that they're going to be working with people. And so they really want to understand what it's going to feel like to work with those people. And so here we're showing the practice page. The average person spends less than 60 seconds on a website. And so when you're building your website, you want to think carefully about the kinds of things you're bubbling towards the top of those pages or that people can scan. If someone is unfamiliar with Goody Clancy, they go to their practice page and all they see is what you have here. You can see that we've put in-page navigation. And so we're focusing on those core messaging ideas that Dave talked about. Who are we? We're an education design firm. What do we believe in? Sustainable practice, workplace equity, growth and mentorship. And we've got these practice areas you might want to learn about. Someone could not even scroll past, and you get a pretty quick sense of some of the priorities of Goody Clancy. Now, of course, we want people to scroll past, and this is where you can see the visual identity sort of come into play, and we tell a deeper story. But really on the website is, again, where all these components sort of come together. I'm just going to zip through this a little bit. Tote bags and merchandise are a really effective way to test your visual brand. I'm always surprised at presentations how helpful this is for internal team. My personal belief about this is if this is something that you feel like you would wear on the tee or you would wear to a cookout or whatever it might be, then you feel strong alignment with the brand. And so thinking about ways, even if you don't produce merchandise, but thinking about ways to sort of test your brand through merchandise and understand if your own team, who are going to be some of your best brand ambassadors, would proudly wear branded merchandise can be a really effective way to sort of just pressure test is a brand feeling effective or not. Social media is going to be a really important platform. And then also new business materials. So often people will come to us and say, we need a new website. When we then talk to prospective clients, it turns out that the website is not where they're making their hiring decision. It's through conversation, it's through proposals. And so if you are thinking about making changes to your website, you want to be sure that you understand the trickle-down effect of those changes and how that's going to impact. The way that we approach this is we will, of course, put together brand standards, but the brand standards are, in fact, the last thing that we develop and deliver. Reason being, again, we want to sort of put all of this into the test kitchen, be sure that it's working before we then kind of write the recipe for the brand. And so it's not that we're writing the recipe and then testing the recipe. We are, in fact, like trying to get it right and then basically articulate those components. So what the color palette is, what the typography is, what the photography looks like, both culture photography and then also portraiture. So just quickly to recap, discovery builds trust and excitement. We see it as a foundational component to any branding effort. Messaging is an important first step, and as a design agency, we believe that it really helps to build better visual systems. And your visual identity doesn't exist in a vacuum. So if and when you are thinking about making changes, we would recommend just thinking about it sort of in your broader ecosystem.
All right. Because you asked for it, we're going to do another invigorating flash poll. Is our organization ready to do the work of branding? It's an investment and a commitment. So we suggest that when organizations are considering embarking on this, they ask themselves a series of questions. Has our firm's strategy or offering or focus changed? Does leadership understand what branding entails? Are they on board with it? Do we have people in the organization that have the bandwidth to do the work? And I'd love for Kate to talk about that a little bit later. Does your firm have the financial resources in place to embark on this? And, if we're going to invest in rebranding, do we have kind of longer term resources to kind of maintain and nurture that brand over time? So I'm going to open up the poll and we're going to ask people to answer those questions. Launching now. All right. We'll take just a couple minutes on this one.
Hmm.
Interesting.
Hmm.
Give this another minute.
Looks like it's stalled out a bit, Dave, and maybe we can end it.
All right. So we'll wrap this one up in about 10 seconds and then we can look at the responses and talk about them a little bit. All right. I'm going to wrap this one up and we will share the results. Okay. So again, it looks like a lot of these kind of middle of the road kind of looks like the same kind of similar. I think it would be interesting, and Kate, I don't know if you want to jump in here a little bit and talk about any of these really, leadership being on board or kind of resources that you needed to allocate. What was the good?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to talk about that. There was a point, and we'll get to this in a little bit, but there was a point during our sort of content creation portion of our website work where Dave and his team sort of provided us with a schedule of all the work that needed to be done and how many hours it would take, and we had to figure out how to get it done. And I felt like that was critical to the point of question 3, like, are there people in your organization who have the bandwidth to do the work? And number 2, does leadership understand? We needed that sort of content creation map in order for us to understand internally within our marketing team how we were going to get the work to happen and at what pace and by whom. But we also needed that to set expectations within the firm leadership group about how available marketing would be for anything else. So I had to have an upfront conversation with our operations team to say, for 3 months, don't think of us as a 4-person marketing team. You need to think of us as a 1 to 2-person marketing team, because that's how much time this is really going to take. And I thought that doing that conversation early was helpful for us as a team, for our firm.
Yeah. Kate, did leadership kind of understand the value of kind of needing to address the brand? I mean, or was there kind of an education process there about, like, this is what brand is and this is why we need to address it?
In our instance, because we had done the strategic planning process first, and that had set our firm on a different trajectory, and it clarified and focused our market, it was 100% crystal clear from the top down that we needed to start reflecting that in our presence online and elsewhere. There was never any question that the website and the rebranding work was our number one priority. So yeah, it was fairly simple for us. I could imagine it being less straightforward if you're not doing a revolution of brand, but a sort of evolution of an existing brand, then it might be more difficult.
Yeah.
That's a perfect segue, Kate. And we're getting tight for time, so I'm gonna keep us moving. Great. So one of the things in the first question, we talked about whether there's been a big shift. If your brand is working and there hasn't been a big strategic shift to your organization and your website's feeling up to date, do not touch anything. It is so much work, and there's a lot of equity sort of built in what you did. But, if you realize that you have a need for, new component, updated website, whatever it might be, typically, we recommend that organizations think about updating their website every 5 years. The more consistently you update your website, the longer shelf life you can get out of it. So if you're making sort of incremental updates to your website every year, you might actually get 7 or 8 years out of your website. If you've touched nothing, it might start to feel a little bit dated, closer to that 5-year mark. When organizations come and say, hey, we need a new website for XYZ reason, one of the things we might consider is, okay, well, does the brand need to change? And do we think about that on this scale of being more of an evolution or a revolution? Goes back to discovery, and we're going to just talk super quickly through a couple of case studies. MIT List Visual Arts Center is the contemporary arts museum on MIT's campus. They came to us. They had recently gotten a grant to digitize their archives. And so they had a need to create a new website because they had this grant. Their website was also feeling pretty dated, but they had a logo in particular that they were pretty happy with that had been designed by another firm, Toki, based out of Minneapolis. And so we worked on their website, but in the process of working on their website, we realized that there were additional sort of brand needs and brand updates. So you can see here that we retained the spirit and the quality of the foundational logo, but before and after sort of on the left, right. In discovery, what we heard from people is the logo's distinctive. We would be really sad if we lost it. We love the logo. We think it helps set them apart. It feels in keeping with sort of who they are as an organization. But what we also heard was that it was really heavy. It was really hard to work with. It competed with artwork. And so part of what we did is we made those changes to sort of clean up the logo, but also made an outline version of the logo so that it could appear in concert with artwork, which is, of course, the bread and butter of their visual system, without sort of taking over. The change to the logo, where we had that outline version, then imbued more changes where we established a type system where the type could be outlined. And then that ended up leading to additional sort of brand articulations and expressions for them, in particular wayfinding and signage on campus, to help create a little more clarity in terms of where the museum is and what their purpose was. So definitely sort of on the evolution scale. Different from that, Woodwell Climate Research Center, they came to us and said, we need a website, but we do not want you to affect any change to our logo or to our name. We went through discovery and there were two big problems. Problem one was that everyone said, I spend the first 5 minutes trying to explain that we're not the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute because there was a lot of confusion with their name. And then problem two is we're in a climate crisis. And so this is a direct quote from Discovery. We have very little time. We need to communicate faster. And we want to match the urgency of the moment. This logo really does not sort of align with that kind of messaging tone and feel. And so we worked with them to think about, it's a group of scientists. They wanted to really position the scientists as the rock stars of the organization. And so looking at the globe and the sphere of the Earth as sort of a one point of inspiration, and then the Keeling curve, which tracks CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere, we made a radical shift to their logo, which is an abstraction of the Earth and follows that Keeling curve, in addition to a name change, which Dave will talk about in just a second. So you can see here before and after of the logo, big radical revolution, before and after of the website. This has really set them up for success in terms of fundraising and being able to go further with their work as well.
Yeah, so again, Woodwell had said the name is not a problem and changing the name is absolutely, off the table. Doing that discovery, we heard that the name was the biggest problem and that changing the name absolutely had to be on the table. So again, kind of illustrates the value of having those internal and external conversations. They also needed a big idea that was going to kind of create some urgency and kind of support the rest of the brand that we were developing for the organization. So climate science for change is kind of that big idea theme that we came up with for Woodwell. It flips climate change on its ear in kind of a startling and interesting way. It really makes scientists kind of the protagonists and the heroes, and science becomes this weapon in the global fight. And change speaks to, action and movement, but it's not necessarily a political word or a politically charged word. So climate science for change was the big idea for Woodwell. You can see that kind of all over the website and reflected across their different communications. And we also like this because it has a lot of kind of different extensions that can be used all kinds of different ways.
Great. Dave, I'm thinking we should go to the last chapter and then just open it up to Q&A if we have time for the poll. Okay, great.
Right.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so we want to talk a little bit about this idea of kind of website as a garden. Like a garden, you don't just like plant it and leave it. It needs to be kind of tended and watered and taken care of. So what does that entail when it comes to brand and website? There's some things you want to think about. One is content contributors. Who's responsible for developing the content and design? Where is their subject matter expertise required? This is obviously super important in this space where there are people with kind of different domain expertise. How are we kind of harnessing that knowledge for creating content? Content workflows. How is content going to be edited, fine-tuned, finalized? What's the process there? Who's going to have access to website, social, and other platforms? And then training and support. How are content contributors going to be trained and supported? What's the process for that, for making sure people in the organization know how to use the new brand? What resources are you going to need to develop to support content contributors? Kate, I don't know if you want to speak to how any of that went down at Goody Clancy.
First of all, I'm not seeing any of the slides. Ah, there they all are. Yeah. Okay, wonderful. No, not right now.
Right. And then finally, maintenance. How often do you plan to update the site? How are you going to use analytics or other data to inform site updates and enhancements?
Great. So with that, we wanted to be sure we left plenty of time for Q&A. We've got about 15 minutes left. We have one more poll if anyone's dying for a third poll, which we certainly can run, but also would be very happy to just open it up to the group for questions. You can raise your hand. You can put questions in the chat. Happy to open it up. I see one question from earlier. How often do you recommend rebranding process? I think that really is a sort of that depends. We don't recommend for website, as I noted, I think it's about every 5 years-ish. Again, if you sort of update your website with some frequency, you'll be able to get a longer shelf life out of it. For some brands, you might have the same brand for 20 years, and that's fine. But what's really important is sort of that brand hygiene phase. Are you checking in with your brand? Are you doing that discovery work to be sure that your brand is working effectively? If you have a good brand, you should be able to evolve it and be sure it's just feeling current and it's working for you without a radical revolution, unless, again, there's some kind of strategic change within your organization.
And we say the same thing with messaging as well. We always say, you know, messaging platform is kind of a living, breathing thing. We intentionally deliver the final version of a messaging platform as a Google Doc, because there is this feeling that as time goes on and as you start to use the messaging and as the organization starts to evolve and change, you're going to kind of tweak the messaging as you go. So again, it's a kind of constant evaluation and updating and evolution.
Yeah. And I see some earlier chats about sort of evolving. I would say evolving is good, but documenting and having a shared source of truth is also important, because one thing that we often find is, we talked about this earlier in the session, you might have one unit who's interpreting the brand in one way, another unit who's interpreting the brand in another way. The risk for that is, imagine you're trying to hire someone new. This person is being heavily recruited. You want them to come to their firm, but they're also interviewing with other firms. If they're not hearing the same version of what your firm's all about and who your firm is across the board, that starts to sort of put up all sorts of funny signals, which is like, well, which version of this firm is the real version? And so consistency is less about a set of rules and more about a shared understanding of kind of the priorities for the organization and how you articulate those through your brand. One of the things we have anecdotally found with several of the firms that we've worked with is that evolution to the website and to the brand in particular has really helped with talent recruitment, because sometimes it's the case where if your website doesn't actually match the authentic version of what it feels like to work within the organization, it can be really hard, because someone's looking at your website, they're looking at your social media, and they're saying, well, they told me this, and I got this feeling when I went to go visit them, but somehow the website isn't quite feeling the same way. And so again, that consistency can be a little squishy squashy. Sometimes it's like a little bit about a feel, but being sure that you have that common thread throughout the organization can be very, very helpful. Other questions or comments? Go ahead, Marcia.
Tammy, can you just talk about how you feel about style guides and, how that all plays in the process too?
Sure. Again, we put together brand books and we typically develop templates. One thing I will say is that neither of those are silver bullets. And I think this goes back a little bit, Kate, to sort of getting leadership on board. It is important that you have people who have some training in the craft of design and writing who are going to be implementing your brand. It can be tempting for an organization to think, great, we have templates, and now suddenly anyone in the organization can apply our brand consistently. There is still skill and craft in producing these materials. So we absolutely do style guides. These days, we're actually shifting more towards developing starter materials and training people. And the training can sometimes be one-on-one training. We often actually just do short video recordings. So for example, if we build email templates for an organization, usually what we'll do is then have the designer screen record, hey, here's, my name is Leah, and I'm going to show you how I build an email template for X organization. So those are essentially training materials that are a little more dynamic, a little easier if you think about then bringing in a new graphic designer to your organization. We also encourage organizations to do that for themselves. I mean, it's just amazing how easy it is to do things like that these days. And so I would say style guides, yes, but some of it is just thinking about the real humans who are going to be implementing this on the other end of it, and thinking about what's going to really set them up for success. Nobody likes to be given a set of rules, but people, if they can rally behind an idea and feel inspired to help implement that idea, that's when we find it's most successful. Go
And I
ahead,
think
Kate.
on the messaging side, you know, kind of more and more frequently as we're delivering final messaging frameworks, we'll put a whole bunch of before and after examples in, right? So we'll literally take a piece of content, we'll rewrite it, and then we'll actually show where we change things, how those changes align with the new brand. So we're not just kind of dumping this platform on people and saying, okay, good luck. We really want it to be a tool where people can start to execute it, knowing that, you know, that content is going to have to be written in-house over time.
I want to jump in there. So style guides in terms of visual identity and then messaging. In our firm, the inimitable Paul Santos produced a brand guidebook for everybody in the firm when we launched and put it in their goodie bags. And we had a recent office-wide meeting, and I sort of asked the question, how many people have actually referred to their brand? Everybody referred to it. The show of hands was shocking. People look at this book all the time to remind them of who we are, how we are supposed to present ourselves visually and in terms of messaging. And in terms of messaging, again, the messaging toolkit that Dave and his team produced for us, it has legs. We walked away with that toolkit not knowing that we were going to sit down with people and train them in networking before they go off to a conference, maybe for the first time ever, and say, look, this is how we talk about Goody Clancy. Let's role play when you meet one of your clients. How are you going to talk about Goody Clancy? And we refer to the messaging toolkit. So that's been our style guide. It's been like an acting kit.
Right.
Any other questions?
What's this process?
Oh, photographer. I'm glad you brought photography up. I will say when we worked with ARC, I remember they were very smart about it at one point, saying like, but what's really the all-in cost? I think they understood there's the design and the messaging, but there is also sort of all of these soft costs around it. As we noted earlier, portraiture is super important, culture photography. And so when you're thinking about budgeting for this, we would recommend thinking about budgeting for photography. Typically, when we work on a brand, and I would say most design agencies, this would be the case, they would make recommendations for the art direction style of photography. But it is just a nice time to then think about who is that partner that you're going to be hiring, what's involved with that. Do you have offices across the country? If so, how are you going to coordinate, photography across those offices? And, it's really subtle, but what is it that makes your portraiture style feel a little different from the next firms? Differentiating yourself in a competitive market space is really important, and it's all those small little touches. So I would say definitely trickles down to photographers, and I'm focusing on culture. That could also be the case for how you're shooting your work as well. But sometimes you'll have a legacy portfolio that it would just be cost prohibitive to reshoot those things. There have been instances before where we've looked at legacy portfolio photography and made recommendations about just more modern ways to crop some of the imagery, to show some of the imagery, other kinds of imagery that you might be able to bring in. We typically co-create, in particular with architecture firms. So after we design the templates for the site, as Kate mentioned, designers from our team were working closely with designers from her team to actually then test out that system on various project pages. So Paul from Goody Clancy would sketch some pages, sync up with designers from our team, have a little bit of a feedback session, talk about what works, what doesn't work. And so that co-creation model can work very, very well if you find the right fit firm to work with you on that. Kate, did you imagine photography to be a part of this when you started?
I honestly hadn't thought about it.
Yeah.
I think I had undervalued the importance of culture photography and portraiture when we were going into it. You say photography, I immediately think of going to a photo shoot with a project. So
Yeah.
this process certainly evolved my I don't know how I understand our presentation of ourselves.
And what I will say is consistently, not just with architecture firms, but across the board, it's hard to hire good people right now. And what we have heard across the board is if your site perhaps only has leadership on it, which I think was a trend for some amount of time. The young people who work within organizations, this has really been very consistent. They want to feel seen. They want to feel respected for the work that they do. And so this is part of what's driving some of that culture photography is you want people within your organization to feel invested in your brand. And one way to do that is just to be sure you've got portraits of full staff, but also culture photography where, you know, they can feel a sense of pride in the work that they do and feel a sense of ownership in the firm that they're a part of.
There's something this sort of topic hits at too, which was embedded in poll 3, which we skipped over for time. And that was about who you see as your primary target audience for the website. And I think during our process, we early recognized that current and prospective employees were perhaps our primary audience. You know, certainly equal audience to prospective clients or existing clients. And what we have heard as we've hired since launching the website, I think 100% confirms that. You know, why did you join? What drew you to Goody Clancy? Website comes up first and foremost. The way that they saw our firm culture on our site comes up over and over again. So, yeah.
And I think with firms in this space, it becomes a bit of a virtuous cycle. So good people create good work begets more good work. Which begets more good people. And so I think we've heard similar things, Kate, but I do think that sometimes it might be, hey, we need to develop a new website because we need to get new business. It's a long-term strategy. A new website's not going to result in new business in the short term, but over years, I think it absolutely can. And some of that has to do with recruiting and, again, retaining people who have that sense of brand pride.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
My ability to sit comfortably in silence is like, I don't know, half the average. So please, if you have a question, throw it in the chat, jump in. You've got roughly 2.5 seconds before I start to panic. One of the questions that was in the poll, I actually thought was pretty interesting. It was, how often do you think you should be updating your site? And it goes to the question that I hard passed on earlier, Dave, about, you know, your maintenance strategy.
Yeah.
Hell no. And the options were once a week, once a month, once a quarter, a couple of times a year, once a year, never. I think we had gotten to a point of never towards the end with our prior website. And it was as we were starting to let go of maintenance that the site started to really lose value for us as a firm. It was like we amicably parted ways, but we never got a new website to reflect it. When we launched our site in the summer, we were so thrilled and excited about it and you know, happy to show it off and also exhausted from the awesome effort that it required. And I think developing a maintenance strategy took us a couple months, to be honest. And now we finally are back in a groove and have a strategy, and it identifies for us in our little Trello board, you know, how often we need to be asking certain questions. And now we have tasks that we need to complete every month, and we have tasks that we need to complete every quarter. So I don't know whether that matches with what you would say about website maintenance, but that's how we're approaching it now.
Yeah, and Macy added a question about that. I think, Macy, it's all of the above. So she's asking, is it adding new projects, staff, bigger changes? If the latter, what keeps websites fresh in general terms? What I would say is that there's going to be the kind of ongoing maintenance, right? Like you've got to wash your sheets every week or however often you wash your sheets, but then you're going to do sort of like a deep spring cleaning now and then. What we typically recommend is just thinking about a strategy for that. When you add new staff, how quickly do you hope to get them up on the website, and what does that require? When you finish a project, not only how quickly do you want to add it to the site, but what is the criteria to determine whether or not that project should make it to the website would be the other thing. Like not every project necessarily goes on the website. So there's things like that that are ongoing maintenance. We typically recommend thinking about bigger changes every year or two, and that really just looks different for every firm. So sometimes doing things like a homepage refresh can do a lot to extend the shelf life of your website and would be much lower cost than thinking about a complete overhaul. Other times it might be adding, video content or expanding bio pages or adding a new kind of content. It really just depends on the firm and what your messaging priorities are. But usually, every year or two, you want to think about if you have had a client who's been looking at you, trying to think about the right firm. You don't want them to come 4 years later and think it's the same exact site. So you want to be thinking about ways you keep it fresh for them, signaling that you're relevant, signaling that the work that you're doing is sort of keeping up with the times. Again, same for prospective hires too. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution there, but what we strongly recommend against is just building your website and letting it sit minus the sort of washing of the sheets. You really should be thinking about opportunities to stay ahead of the curve a little bit. I'm with you, Kate. That
Oh,
might be
good.
it, unless there's final questions. Well, thank you so much for inviting us in. We really
Thank you
appreciate
so
having
much.
the time and having the opportunity to share a little bit with you.
Let me thank Jennifer Wells, who I know is on the call, because when we were, ramping up to get rolling on this whole project, she generously gave some of her time to me to talk me through her process with other firms. So Jennifer, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, Tammy, Dave, Kate, thank you guys so much for this
Thank you.
fantastic presentation.
It's great.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.